was raised primarily in North America, but I was actually born in Tokyo, Japan. I ended up marrying a Japanese woman, and so I'm back in Japan on a fairly regular basis. And when I'm back in Japan, sometimes I wonder, what would my life have been like if our family had not moved away when I was so young? What would my life have been like if I had not only been born, but also raised in Japan? And I think about how there would have been enormous pressure on me to get into the right preschool, and then pressure to pass the exam for the right kindergarten, and eventually real pressure to get into the right college, and then to be picked up by the right company. And I breathe a sigh of relief as I think, thank God I wasn't raised in such a relentless rat race. But if I'm honest with myself, living here in North America, I haven't escaped the pressure to achieve. When I was younger, I felt the pressure to achieve in sports and in school. And then I felt the pressure to achieve in the corporate world. And I've even felt the pressure to achieve as a pastor. Ambition is a good thing. But if you feel like you need to achieve something in order to prove to yourself or to someone important that you are enough, then life begins to feel like a burden. And if you've ever felt the burden to achieve as a student, at work, in a relationship, or some other sphere of life, then Jesus has some really good news for you. He says in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, these words of invitation: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And so if you feel burdened in some way or weary, this invitation is for you. Jesus says, come and experience my rest. How will this happen? Jesus says, by wearing my yoke. When Jesus uses the word yoke, and I hope this is obvious enough, but he's not referring to a yellow egg yolk. He's talking about a wooden bar that is placed across the back of the neck of an ox, enabling it to more easily pull a heavy load. And so here, Jesus is comparing you and me to an ox. It's not very flattering. If we're American, maybe we would prefer to be compared to a soaring eagle. If we're Canadian, maybe an industrious beaver. But Jesus does not compare us to an eagle or a beaver, but to an ox. It's not very complimentary, but it is apt because many of us feel weighted down like an ox by all kinds of burdens. When Jesus' first century hearers first heard these words, they would have felt weighted down by things like, will I have enough money to feed my family? They were living in a poor farming-based economy. Parents would have been concerned about the well-being of their children in a world where most newborns did not live to see their 20th birthday. We also have concerns about our finances and about the well-being of our family and loved ones. But today, we have the burden of wondering whether we are achieving enough, whether we are enough. People in the first century would not have felt this burden as keenly because they were living in a world where their station in life was largely determined by the family they were born into and their social circumstances. We live in a time and place where we can climb educational, professional, and social ladders. That's a great thing. But what if in this world we don't become really successful, or the people that we or others projected we would become? We can feel like a failure. And so if you've ever felt the burden of needing to achieve so that you feel like you are enough, this invitation is for you. Jesus says to you, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." How so? By placing my yoke upon you. Some of you are saying, if I want to rest, I don't need a yoke. I need a hammock, or I need a massage, or I need an all-expense-paid vacation to Hawaii. But Jesus says, no. If you want to experience my rest in your body and in your soul, take my yoke upon you. Why? Because he knows that we are wearing the wrong yokes. Yokes that don't fit us very well. Yokes that chafe against the back of our neck. And some of the heaviest yokes that we wear are the yokes of people's expectations. And maybe the heaviest yoke of all is the yoke of our own self-expectation. As I said earlier, I know about that. When I was younger, I felt the pressure to achieve in sports and in school. And then I felt the pressure to achieve in the world of work. When I was single, I even felt the pressure to boost my sagging self-esteem by being with the right romantic partner. And Jesus says, if you're wearing a heavy yoke, the heavy yoke of your own self-expectations or the expectations of someone else, take that heavy yoke off of your shoulders and wear my yoke. So what is Jesus' yoke? It's not really clear in the verse what yoke means. And so if a word in the Bible isn't clear, one of the best ways to figure out its meaning is to look at it in its context. And so if you scroll back 4 or 5 verses, you see that Jesus is celebrating the wonder of his Father in heaven's love for him. He's just basking in that. He says, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for revealing your truth not so much to the best and the brightest, but to children and to those who approach you with the humility of a child. And Jesus here is just exulting in the wonder of his Father's love for him. Darrell, a New Testament scholar and pastor, points out that the yoke Jesus wants us to wear is the yoke that he himself wore. And the yoke that Jesus wore was the yoke of his perfect Father's unique love for him. And the yoke that Jesus wants you to wear is the yoke of your perfect Father's unique love for you. And when you wear the yoke of your Father's love for you, as simple as this sounds, it will change the way you move through the world. Some years back when I was single, I was in Japan talking to a friend of mine about a personal problem he was facing. And during our very honest conversation, the name of his college friend, Sakiko, comes up. And I blurt out, I've always liked her. And he said, well, she's still single and beautiful. You should call her. And I'm like, no, I'm not here to socialize. And he says, as he pulls out his phone, but she remembers you. She had a good impression of you. She asks about you. And so he proceeds to call her. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't know what to say. And the phone is ringing and I put it to my ear. And she answers and I say, hi, this is Ken. And then she asks, are you the guy who went to Berkeley? I'm like, no, that was Jeff. She had no idea who I was. She didn't remember me at all. And then I asked her, are you doing anything on Wednesday? Do you want to go out for coffee with me? She said, no, I'm busy. I don't know what came over me, but I then said, I don't know what your plans are, but can you change them? Now, I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but Japanese people culturally have a hard time saying no, especially twice in a row. So the cultural norms were working in my favor. We got together for coffee because she felt obliged. It didn't go very well. But we did get married. Not right then and there, of course, but eventually. But that's not the point of my story. You wouldn't know this about me, but I am terrified of rejection, especially in romantic pursuit. And as I look back, I wonder, how was it that I was able to put myself out like that for possible rejection and heartache? I think that part of the answer is that I was slowly learning to wear the yoke of the Father's love on my shoulders. And when you know that you are loved by the one who matters most, you're more willing to take a risk, to face possible rejection or failure. You become a little bit more courageous, a bit more bold, whether it's in a relationship or some other kind of venture. Living with a sense of God's love on our shoulders changes the way we move through the world. In the sessions to come, we will explore some of the practices that awaken us to a sense of God's love, including silent meditation, Sabbath, praying a prayer of gratitude, so that we can offer our very best to God and others, not out of an anxious need to prove that we are enough, but out of a place of inner rest and gratitude that comes from knowing that we are already accepted, in fact, cherished by the one who matters most. But first, we will explore why the practices are necessary.